Okay, so now I think we are good to go. Okay, so before going further, any questions or comments so far?
No, sir.
Okay, so let's go further. So let's look into. Is there any question or comment? Okay, so let's look into the economic political conditions that contributed to the development of Bitcoin, right? First of all, Bitcoin has took some inspiring ideas from the gold standard. We have to understand what aspect it took. We have to understand what is gold standard, right? So uh, I don't know whether you have any course on the economics and things like that. Do you have a course in engineering on the economics?
No, not at Professor. No.
Okay.
They have some open electives, but
Okay.
economics is not introduced to them.
Okay. So I will try to briefly explain those concepts, like what is the money standard and how the value of the money is regulated and other kinds of things. So the gold standard, people, of course, first of all, Bitcoin was influenced a lot from the gold as standard. And it took some important design key ideas and things like that. So that's why it's also referred as digital gold or something like that. But first of all, what is gold standard? So the gold standard is people in the previous days, especially from the 1800 centuries to 1971, the countries used gold as some kind of medium to create exchanges between different currencies. For example, let's say that we have Indian rupee. On the other hand, we have US dollar or something like that, right? And how do we decide how many rupees should be equal to 1 US, right? That is the exchange rate normally decided, right? So in the previous times, especially from 1800 to 1971, what people used to do is the currencies were fixed at exchange rates by taking gold as standard. So that means, for example, let's say that how much gold you can buy with 1 rupee and how much gold you can buy with $1. Based on that, the exchange rate is decided, right? So countries use it to use gold as a standard for pegging the value of the currency to the gold, and based on this pegged value to the gold, and then they can find out how much is the exchange rate between the US dollar and Indian rupee. So that is a quite common standard which people use it to do. So a lot of countries, what they do is they could exchange their currencies for gold, and or sometimes also the countries or nations, they will also peg their currencies to some fixed dominated currencies. For example, in the recent times, many of the nations, they peg their currencies to the dollar, so that because the dollar is dominated international currency and other kinds of things. So that's also another way of doing things. They either go peg with the gold or peg with the dominated currencies. So, but on the other hand, as more and more countries are accepted gold as a standard, because it is international, it is not, it has no nationality, and things like that. So the drawback with pegging into a dollar is, if dollars go down, then your currency will also go down, right? So on the other hand, gold is accepted as some kind of international standard, and so that's why people use it to peg their currencies to gold standard to decide the exchange rate and things like that. Internally, as more and more countries subscribe to gold as a standard, the gold standard also has become a domestic method for regulating the quantity and supply of the money. What does it mean? So how do we know that how many rupees the Indian government has to print? So basically, there is some economic theories behind it, saying that how much extra gold you produce, right? Extra gold means, don't take it literally, like mining gold and producing gold and things like that. It is in the internal sense saying that how much is your gross domestic product and how much value is your country producing and things like that. So what is the production of your country as in terms of the gold, and then they will calculate. There is some calculation saying that how much extra currency you can print, right? So people use gold standard for regulating the supply of the money in their countries as well. What is a big problem if you print more and more currency? Let's say that the government wants more money, and the currency printing is regulated by the currency printing is in the hands of the government. And what is stopping the government to print more money? Right? They can easily print money, no issues, because it is the Reserve Bank which is in the control of the central government, and central government will say to the Reserve Bank saying that print more money, we need more money, and they can print it. What is the drawback of that approach?
Hyperinflation.
Yes, inflation. What happens is because the goods, everybody, we are chasing after the goods, right? You have money. Money is nothing but some kind of paper currency or whatever it may be. But what you use money is you will use money to buy goods. Since the supply of goods is the same, if you print more and more money, the value of the money will be reduced. So that is called inflation, right? So, and somehow till when gold was used as a standard, since they bind by this gold standard as a basic, you can say, guideline for printing money, so people were, the countries used it to behave responsibly. So that means they normally don't use it to print more and more money than what is according to these economic theories and things like that. So there was a stable economic conditions happened. And during the World War II, so Germany has printed a lot of money because they need more money and things like that. And at that point of the time, what happened? It turned into a very high hyperinflation, and so even to buy a bread, you need to carry a huge amount of the German dog or whatever the currency at that time. They have to carry huge amount of money. The value of money is reduced to nothing, something like that. Okay, and so to give more intuition, so if we look into the inflation rates between 1880 and 1914, why 1914? Because 1917 we have the First World War, and then subsequently we have the Second World War. So there was a lot of uncertain conditions across the world, right? If you look into the inflation rates, it was around 0.1%, which is very, very marginal, right? Very, very marginal. But on the other hand, if you look into the inflation rates from 1946 to 2003, it was around 4%, 1%, and things like that. Somehow, this gold pegging and people using gold as a standard to decide how much money they want to print and things like that. So it was helping a bit to control the inflation and things like that. Because the exchange rate were fixed and the gold standard caused price levels of the worldwide to move together. So what does it mean? If the dollar goes up, all the currencies and dollar and all the currencies, they were moving together. So if the value of the money dollar goes up and all other currencies used to go up and things like that, there was such a kind of movement in those days when gold was accepted as a standard. But of course, I don't say this is a perfect system and things like that, but it has other problems. But on the other hand, at least the inflation, it was able to manage the inflation, right? Inflation rate was quite manageable as the tight control over how much money governments can print, because this is used as a standard kind of thing. But what happened is, before going further, let's look into what kind of ideas Bitcoin got from the gold as standard. First of all, Bitcoin got this idea about the statelessness of the gold, right? So as I mentioned before, gold is stateless. It doesn't belong to any nationality. right? And it is also international, right? It's used by the internationally, and it has no affiliation to one country. So this sort of the statelessness idea they inspired from the gold. And secondly, uh, like the gold, they got this idea of limited money supply, right? So they have seen what happens if you print more and more money, right? So when you print more and more money, they can lead to the deflation and the inflation and other kinds of things. So that's why they observe this limited supply, right? So the gold is the amount of gold that is put into the market is very limited, because you have to mine, and mining is a huge process. Many times gold mining is not profitable. The amount of money you spend to dig the gold is much more than the value of the gold you process out of it, right? So that's why many countries, even though they have gold mines, they don't dig and mine the gold and things like that. So the second important design criteria which took from the gold is you need to have limited supply of the coins. So that's why the Bitcoin also capped the number of Bitcoins to 21 million. Again, we will see more details when we look into the more the technical aspect of the Bitcoin, saying that so you cannot have more than 21 million Bitcoins in circulation by 2040 or something like that, right? So that also to make sure that the currency is not deflated and things like that. So on the other hand, restricted supply of the Bitcoin led to a positive price pressure. So that's why the treasury is increasing. And as the craze, or you can say the interest for the Bitcoins is increased, because people want to have Bitcoins, people want to buy Bitcoins. So the demand for Bitcoin is increasing. And so there is more demand than the supply, you can say. So that's why the price of the Bitcoin is increasing, increasing, right? So at least it's not decreasing and things like that. Again, I'm not going into details whether it's stable or not, how much, whether the value is real value or a hyper value, or all. Let's not talk about all those things, but at least having this fixed supply of the money, they took it from they took it from the gold standard. And let's briefly look into this global financial crisis, which happened around 2007, 2008. So this was a big financial crisis happened. I think many of you are young kids at the time and things like that. So let's briefly look into what has caused this global financial crisis, right? So Bitcoin was created during the global financial crisis. You can say right after the global financial crisis. And so the recession was caused by the lack of transparency between the banks and their customers, right? Especially the unscrupulous banking practices. You can say that unethical, or you can say what is a good for word for it, the not systematic practices employed by the banks, right? So let me tell what happened during this crisis and things like that. So since around 2002 or 2003, I don't remember the correct time. So the regulations, there was a deregulation for financial industry. What does it mean? So previously, the financial institutions were tightly controlled in US. Like for example, let's say that if I am a customer, if I take a loan from the bank for buying an apartment, so I put my property or asset as a mortgage, right? So the mortgage is the apartment is mortgaged to the bank. So the bank owns the apartment. But on the other hand, the bank cannot re-mortgage it to someone else. So it is there was a tight regulation before 2002 and 3 saying that you cannot put the assets which are mortgaged to the banks into the derivatives market. So, but there was a deregulation around that time, saying that giving more freedom to banks and things like that. So, what the banks did is they have several people taking the loans, housing loans. So, they have all these properties with the banks, right? And since there is deregulation, now what they did is they put all these mortgage properties and they offer it as a derivatives. So what is a derivative? To be a simple terms, since let's say that bank has, let's say that we have a bank and it gave loan to 100 customers. So it has the property of all the 100 apartments or houses, right? So before 2002 and 2003, they are not allowed to remortgage these to someone else. But since there is a deregulation, what they did is they combined these properties and offered as a portfolio and offered to many companies who want to invest in that. Again, the financial institutions and the hedge funds and things like that, they invested money into these mortgages, especially mortgages and the derivatives. It was quite fine. If you look from the bank point of view, bank is getting money from two places, right? On one hand, they are getting money as we pay interest to them because I took a loan from the bank by pledging or mortgaging my property. So I'm paying interest for this loan, right? So banks is getting on one way getting money from the customers. On the other hand, banks did a clever trick. So what they did is in US especially, the properties they have different ratings. So for example, if you have a non-white the community, then the properties will have a less value. You can say called subprime mortgages. You can say subprime assets and things like that. But on the other hand, if you have good schools and good locality and things like that, then these are the prime assets, right? And what banks did is they did a very clever trick. So they combined 19 sub properties. Let's say that they have created a derivative using 100 mortgages assets, right? Like let's say 100 houses. Out of 100 houses, 90 houses they are located in the subprime areas. So that means the troublesome area where nobody want to buy the apartments and things like that. And then they combined with 10 properties in the prime areas. And then they got a rating saying that it is A rating or A plus rating kind of rating they got. So this is some kind of trick which they did. Since you have these prime properties, it was rated as A plus or something like that. And people use it to hedge funds and the financial institutions use it to buy these derivative markets, and there was a lot of things going on. So the banks are also getting money by repledging or mortgaging these properties to the financial institution. So the banks are getting money from the two ways, right? So it is more lucrative, more profitable for the banks, and that has created a lot of problem because banks getting more and more greedy. So what they did is, and then there was a huge demand for houses because the housing market is going up. The housing price are going up, and people more and more people want to buy houses. Then the banks have created interest-free loans. So interest-only loans, not interest-free, not interest-only loans. What does it mean? Let's say that I buy this apartment. I buy an apartment for 1 crore, right? And in normal bank loan, what you need to do is you need to pay the interest for 1 crore, the money you took from the bank, and also part of the principal. So your bank installment will contain both the interest component and also principal components because you have to pay both the things and stuff like that. If you pay like that, maybe in 20 years, probably you will pay off the whole loan. So that is the bank loan concept. And this new type of loan, you don't pay any principal component, but you can only pay the interest. So it is like then the amount of money you can pay as an installment is reduced, right? So for example, let's say that my capacity based on my earning was 1 crore. So I was able to buy 1 crore property because I was able to pay this installment, which is principal and interest, right? If I go for a new loan, this interest only loan, then I don't need to limit myself to 1 crore. Probably I can buy a 3 crore apartment or a villa because I'm only paying the interest. I'm not paying the principal, right? Of course, maybe the property will be never become to me or won't owned by me, but on the other hand, it will help me to stay in the property. Is there any question or comment? Okay, so that has created.
Is there any question on this economical introduction?
Pardon?
Because it's literally new to you people.
Yeah. I will find some resources. I have some answer. You are asking about some paper or something like that, right?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. But I will try to find some. I have put some articles which are easy to follow, easy to read, and things like that. So easy to follow. So I will also try to find if there are any good things. Okay. Yeah. Yeah, so this has created a lot of problem because now people are borrowing, going for a higher loans and things like that. We are their paying capacity and stuff like that. So finally, what happened is this derivative market was going fine and things like that, and then all of the sudden there was some kind of inflationary measures and things like that. So the central bank has increased interest rates, right? So, and then the Federal Reserve raised the interest rates. So what happened is, since these loans are interest-only loans or flexible loans and things like that, like the floating interest rate and things like that, when the interest rate was increased, many people who bought the mortgages in the subprime areas and things like that, they were not able to pay their mortgage, pay their installments, right? So they became defaulters. If you don't pay installment for your loan, then you will become defaulter maybe after 3 months or 6 months, whatever it may be. So this has created a big problem because a lot of people are becoming defaulters because that they are not able to pay these high interest rates and high installments and things like that. So more and more houses were becoming defaulter, becoming on the market for resale and things like that. And then on top of that, the US employment has reached to 9.6%, so very high unemployment rates, and the retirement funds fell by 20%. And so America, if you consider only USA, they lost 12.8 trillion worth of the GDP those subsequent years, right? So it was a big problem which has created some very global financial crisis. It didn't only restrict itself to US because many of the countries they followed these US model. I remember that even in Denmark there was interest-free loans, right? Interest-only loans, and people were buying expensive cars and expensive houses and things like that, right? It didn't only stop at the US, but this crisis has created a lot of problems. You might argue that what is the problem with the banks? Because the banks have the properties, right? Of course, if I become defaulter, my property will belong to the bank. But on the other hand, during these troubled times, bank cannot maintain all these properties. They have to sell these properties and they want to get back their money, right? Because bank needs money for rotation. So there are more houses for sale in the market, and there was no one to buy. So it was a quite catastrophic situation for both customers and also for the bank. Again, who is responsible for that? Is it the customers responsible? Is it the bank responsible? Right. So this was the major financial crisis. What happened? Then people lost their jobs, they lost their homes, and all the market assets went to banks. On the other hand, banks were at the verge of the bankruptcy because they have no rotation of the currency. because all the money is frozen in the assets, and there is no one to buy the assets and things like that. So almost the banks went to bankruptcy, right? So this was a huge, big problem because it will be like a financial meltdown and it will kill the whole economy and things like that. So what governments did, the governments gave money to the banks as a bailout packages. So trillions of dollars were printed extra, and trillions of dollars were given to the banks as a bailout package, right? So that they don't go bankrupt, they will survive and things like that. And you know what happened afterwards? The banks got trillions of the dollars, perfectly fine, and then the bank executives, the top management, they took hefty bonus packages because they got free money from the government, right? And somehow this money was used for money circulation and things like that. But on the other hand, these guys who must be made responsible for all these unsuppressed practices, they got huge hefty bonus packages and things like that. You know what people did get? They lost their jobs, they lost their homes, and they were literally on the roads with they got nothing in return from the government or banks. You can see here how the things happened. uh, it is the banks who went with the small practices and stuff like that in the chase of, or you can say in the greed of money. They went above all the regulation and things. They went to these malpractices, and they created a situation, and the people suffered because they lost their jobs and homes and all other things. So they were literally on the roads. But on the other hand, who got benefit from the government? It is the banks. And the banks, all of the banks, they got the bailout packages. But did the people get anything in return? They got nothing. Right? They lost all their homes and things like that. So Nakamoto witnessed all this happen, and then their idea was to delegate trust, or you can say decentralize the trust, or take away the trust from the centralized authorities, because we can see what type of things they can do, the governments and banks, especially in these conditions and things like this. So that is one of the main motivation which they have. So during this period, they wanted to create a system where the trust is not required. Why this situation has happened? Because you have some kind of trust in the banks and the governments, right? You have the trust in the banks, and this trust was misused by the banks, and so this situation has created, right? What happens if you delegate the trust to the underlying algorithms and take away the trust completely? Then there is no need of the centralized organization to provide trust, right? So that's what they try to do. So this is again, this is another movement, Occupy Wall Street. I think it is around 2008 and 9 period. So a lot of people they marched towards Wall Street because they were quite unhappy. People lost jobs and things like that. It's one of the popular movement, and you can see here people were saying that the bailout people, not the banks. You can see how the frustration of the people saying that we suffered financially, but on the other hand, banks and Wall Street, they got benefited by these financial crises because they got money from the governments. And again, whose money is that? It is the money paid by the people, right? People, how do the governments get money? Governments get money because the people will pay taxes to the government, right? So indirectly, the money is contributed by the people, and they suffered because of the great financial crisis, but the money ended up with the banks as the bailout packages and things like that. So that was one of the main motivation why they want to remove the trust into the centralized institutions like the banks. So that was the main issue. So what lessons did Bitcoin take from this great financial crisis? So first of all, avoid trust with the centralized authorities such as banks and government, right? And how do you avoid trust? By giving all users, by giving access to the information to all the users. So the Bitcoin network intentionally avoided establishing this hierarchy, right? Like some institution where you need to where you need to have trust and other kinds of things. So you can say that they decentralized trust. So yeah, Nakamoto, he also this was one of the famous quote, right? The Times 3rd January 2009 article. So that was the time when the first block was mined, you can say, right? The chancellor on the blink of second bailout. So what does it mean? So here is the articles, Times article, you can see. So what happened is, I think this in UK, the chancellor, who is the financial minister, you can say, they already bailed out the banks. 37 billion pounds. They gave it as bail package in the end of around the December 2008 or something like that. And again the chancellor was thinking about the second bailout package, again providing some more billions of dollars to pounds to the banks as a second bailout package. And as a mark of you know um, when he mined the Genesis block, so this is the Genesis block. Of course, the block is in the binary format, right? The hexadecimal format. So this is a hexadecimal editor. If you look into the structure of the Genesis block, you can find this message. Of course, we'll go into the structure of the block in the coming classes and things like that. But it clearly shows that there is a link to the global financial crisis, and cryptocurrencies were launched as a, you can say, a protest against all these malpractices done by the governments and the banks and things like that. And the second important movement is the cyberpunk movement. So these are the guys, basically, these are the cryptographers, right? Like these are the people who contributed to the anonymous communication. And some of the people are heavily involved in inventing the algorithms and things like that. For example, Adam Back and Hughes, and also this Nico Savo. He is the one who wrote the smart contracts, the foundation for smart contracts in 1990s and things like that. So the cyberpunk movement is nothing but a bunch of people from the 1990s. So these were the group of people with the liberal and rebellious ideas from the 1990s. So they all shared the same convention. The internet would soon become an important battleground for the human freedom. This was they thought in 1990s, right? You might not know about the situation in 1990s. In 1990s, we don't have any internet. At least common people don't have internet, right? So internet is very limited to only the institutions, maybe to some universities and kinds of things, but internet was not quite prevalent in those days. Back in 90s, cyberspace was still dominated by the hobbyists and hackers. Only people who have who have the interest in those systems, they were prevalent in the cyberspace and internet and things like that. And the cyberpunks, they believed that it was only a matter of time before the internet will become essential to society, right? Imagine these were the 1990s, and these are the guys have the very foresight saying that, okay, internet is becoming popular, and in no time it will become central to the society, right? Like it will be used by everyone. And for example, probably today we cannot imagine the world without internet, but there were days where no internet and other kinds of things. But in those times, in the initial times where the internet is being adopted, they could see the challenges that will come in the later years. Once the government understood the internet importance, because it is used by the people and it is used as a medium to communicate between the people and things like that. And you know what will government do? Government will move to co-opt and monitor and censor it, right? Because they can censor it and they can enforce the censorship and other kinds of things, right? So that is the reason the cyberpunks, they want to develop tools, especially that will defend the freedom of speech and privacy, the right to privacy. Those are the two main ideas which they have. So here you can see the quotes from the cyberpunks manifesto. Cyberpunks write code. We know that someone has to write software to defend privacy, and we are going to write it. Right? So these were the main motivation. And again, this is quite innovative, and this is very foresighting, because during the days of 1980s or late 1980s or early 1990s, they saw these problems coming up long before the Facebook and long before the Great Firewall of China. Does you know what is Great Firewall of China? So this is nothing but the Chinese government. I think several years back they enforced censorship over the internet. So that means the Chinese people, they cannot access website. All the internet providers who are located in China, I think Google moved out of China because they don't want to follow this regulation. The government put a censorship saying that you have to report the information to us, like the people's behavior, internet behavior, and other kinds of things. On top of that, they have given some websites which people cannot access, right? So if you want to operate in China, then you have to follow this government censorship. So that is called the Great Firewall of China, right? Like they literally build a firewall around the China. So firewall is some kind of you can say hardware tool which protects the internet and other kinds of things. So that's why it is called the Great Firewall of China. And long before Snowden's revelations, Snowden accused that the government are spying on the people's data and what they are doing and other kinds of things. They saw it coming before. So they predicted a regime of online censorship and surveillance that would eclipse the open internet. So back in the days of 90s. And then their solution to these problems were using cryptography, because the cryptography during that time, I think the RSA was invented around the 1970s and 80s, around that period. The RSA algorithm, you can say asymmetric cryptography and things like that. So they were thinking about using cryptography to build tools so that they can protect the freedom of speech and things like that. So that's why there was a lot of research papers published in the anonymous communication. So, for example, if you want to protect your anonymity, and you can use these anonymous communication principles so that you can hide your identity, not revealing to the censorship and things like that. Okay, and then do you know who is this guy? Anyone?
Is he?
Who?
Alan Turing, I guess.
Yeah, Alan Turing. So he's you can say the cryptography. First of all, cryptography is a mathematics of codes and code breaking, right? Alan Turing, you might have seen this movie, Imitation Game, so which depicted the Second World War period, and the Alan Turing was leading or working in with the British military, you can say Allied forces militaries, to break the code from the German Enigma, something like that. So it's the cryptographic codes sent to these German forces and things like that, right? So, but Alan Turing is you can say the father of the modern computing, because he created, you can say, the conceptual model of how computing should work and how the modern computer should work. And so many times people in the computing industry, they attributed that he was the man behind these ideas of computing and things like that. Of course, I think few years after his death, then people built the actual computers and things like that. But many of the ideas, they came from Alan Turing. And in computer science, there is no Nobel Prize. Nobel Prize is only limited to the sciences and social sciences, right? So like the botany and physics, chemistry, and stuff like that. But there is a Alan Turing Prize, which is equivalent to Nobel Prize for computer science. So he's a quite popular figure. And then in 1970s, cryptography really was a new field, especially controlled by the military and governments, right? So in 40s, it is completely driven by the intelligence agencies and things like that. And by the 70s, there was a lot of inventions in the cryptography, but that field was heavily regulated by the military and the intelligence agencies and things like that. For example, even if you anything, yeah, any strong encryption more than 40-bit security is comes under the military thing, and if you use encryption with more than 40-bit security, then it is considered as treason, or you can say and then you can be punishable, right? This was in the 70s and things like that. So then the cyberpunks believed that the cryptography was critical to sovereign internet. So they were focused more on using cryptography to protect the freedom of speech and things like that. Around that time, Diffie-Hellman's algorithm, which is used for the key exchange in the cryptography, like especially in the case of asymmetric cryptography, Diffie-Hellman algorithm is used to exchange the keys between the parties in a very secure manner. So, and RSA is asymmetric cryptography, which is a foundation for digital signatures and things like that. And PGP is a pretty good privacy, which is based on the digital signatures to prove the authenticity of the senders and other kinds of things. All these things were invented during those times, especially so that individuals could have their freedom of speech and privacy and other kinds of things. So they believed that the encryption was the best way to protect from the governments. And here is an example from Adam Back, who is one of the cyberpunks. So basically, what he's saying is he used an RSA algorithm, which is asymmetric cryptography. You know that it will use either 128 or 256-bit encryption. So according to the regulations in those times, 1995, anything which is any encryption that uses a key more than 40-bit comes under meeting. So he basically produced his digital signature, right? So you can see here that is his signature. So he was saying that if he says this as a file, then it comes as a mutiny, because you are not allowed to export any encryption having more than 40-bit that uses more than 40-bit key. But what he's saying is probably what happens if I print it on a paper and send it to my friend, then is that comes under mutiny or something like that, right? So at least it shows how much control the governments and the intelligence agencies used to have over the cryptography, the kind of restrictions we had at the time of the society. But soon we have the HTTP, which is a hypertext transport protocol, which is the backbone for the modern internet, you can say. And we have the SSL, secure socket layer, which is nothing but for secure communication. For example, let's say that you are talking to your bank. For example, if you are using your net banking, and the communication happens over the HTTP and SSL, secure socket layer. So the communication is encrypted so that nobody else can intercept the communication and things like that. So yeah, then the cyberpunk know that the encryption alone won't solve the problem. Of course, you can develop tools for defending the freedom of speech and defending the privacy and other kinds of things. But they also realized that to build a truly digital commons, you need complete sovereign economy as well, because you can have these tools, but on the other hand, you need money, right? And when you need money, you have to rely on the fiat currencies, which comes out into government regulation and things like that. So that's why, in other words, what they think is they also thought of a digitally naive form of money. So it's a some kind of digital currency which is beyond the control of the governments and banks, right? So they want to defend freedom and things like that. So those were the days they thought about, okay, it's not only sufficient we have the tools and cryptography and other kinds of things, but we also need to have an economy which is which cannot be regulated by the governments and the banks. So that is the main intention, or you can say that those are the main ideas behind the digital currencies and things like that. And so again, there it is important to understand the cyberpunk take the economic philosophy. So they were deeply suspicious of the central banks and their control over the monetary policies, especially after the Bretton Woods. What is Bretton Woods? So Bretton Woods is like a currency exchange standard, right? Like this is some sort of the agreement between the countries to have the standard exchange rate protocols and things like that, right? So, and then they were suspecting that the governments will do all sorts of and the banks, especially the national banks, will do all sorts of you can say not malpractices because they are legal, but you can say unsupportive actions and things like that. And especially what happened during the 2008, the central banks created massive amounts of money because they have to support the banks, they have to bail out the banks, and so they have to print trillions and trillions of the dollars of money. It's not only America, everybody did more or less the same kind of things. Of course, maybe it differs between the degree to which they have bailed out and things like that. Some economies were really, they managed very well without having a lot of the crisis. For example, Denmark and other countries, they were very regulative. They already didn't go that far like the US completely regularly. They still have the full control over the banks, and they took some kind of measures not to see that the banks went into bankruptcy and things like that. So it was a lot of European countries. They have a sound economic system, economic practices, so they survived. They didn't. They suffered a bit, but not they didn't go that back. So yeah, why it is why the government wants to earn or make money, we need to dig it for a bit more into details, right? So first of all, how do governments get money, right? There are two ways. The government can get money by taxing people. So for example, income tax and GST, all the taxes which we pay, they go to the government, right? So it's a way of collecting money from the people. And the another way where the government can make money is by printing the money, right? So since the national banks, they are under control of the government. So if they want money, they can simply print more money. So that is called the senior race. So if they print new money, that money automatically belongs to the government, right? So they can go with this either of two approaches, either put more tax on the people to get more money, or print more money without informing the people. Or you can say you don't need consent from the people. But on the other hand, in the first case, where you have a taxation, if you increase the taxation, you don't need consent from the people, but you have to explain to the people why you are putting more tax, right? So not always the people will like that and things like that. And again, there is a limit how much tax you can put on the people. So the second way is an easy way because they don't need to ask permission, nobody's permission. So they just print more and more money, right? That exactly has when government prints more money, then obviously they acquire all the currency. But on the other hand, this will also lead to inflation. What is inflation? Citizen often finds the value of their currency has depreciated. For example, let's say that I have 10 lakhs rupees of worth of money, maybe in a bank or somewhere and things like that. And if the inflation is 10%, I'm losing the worth of the money by 10% after 1 year, right? So I have the same 10 lakhs. Maybe the currency is the same, but the value of the currency is decreased. So the real value of the money, the 10 lakhs which I have in my possession, is only 9 lakhs because now the value of the money has decreased, right? So even though the taxation and the scenarios, they're roughly the same, or you can say when you look from the government point of view, economically they are both the same, right? They both give money back to the government, but the taxation generally require the consent of the citizens, or you can say some kind of assent from the citizens. But printing the money doesn't need any consent; they can just do it unilaterally. And the cyberpunks saw that the money printing is they think that money printing is nothing but a theft from the holders of the currency. If you literally look into the meaning, it's a way of theft, right? Like because since they have the power to print more money, and then they print money, but on the other hand, uh, the people are suffering because their value of the money in their possession is being decreased, right? So that's why they consider it as the theft from the people and things like that. So again, trying to a digital currency. So then there was biggest challenge was how do this digital currency transact? If you try to peg it to a fiat currency, then because your currencies have some kind of pegging with the fiat currency, then you are at the whims and fancies of the country's central bank, right? If this country's central bank decided to print more money, and then it will devaluate the value of the currency will decrease because your digital currency is pegged to it, and your value of the currency will as well goes down, right? Any questions or comments? We will take a break in after a couple of slides, right? So let me finish this cyberpunks economics, and then we'll take a break. So trying to peg or trying to connect a digital currency with the fiat currency is nothing but it comes onto the whims and fancies of the country's central bank, right? So then the cyberpunks, they believe that you need to have a money that is truly native to cyberspace. Again, it's beyond the control of the governments and things like that. So the sort of the money would have to be free from the government's intervention. And then, after all, internet is always borderless and international, right? So then internet native currency that puts everything, regardless of the nationality, at the same level, right? So if you have some kind of currency, anybody from across the world, they can buy, and you don't need to be a US citizen, or you don't need to be that particular kind of citizen and things, right? Of course, ignore all the regulations, whether you're allowed to buy a Bitcoin in India or not, and some other country, is it legal or is it valid? Let's put all those things. But on the other hand, it will, if you have a native currency to the cyberspace, internet-based currency, anybody can buy, right? So that is the main idea behind it. So such a system should not have any central party who is capable of surveying it. We have seen what will happen if you have a central party, like the central banks and things like that. So otherwise, the central party would be tempted to censor the system and manipulate the currency. So on one hand, you have the censorship, like you can track what people are doing in the using by tracking the digital currency and things like that. The second aspect is they can also manipulate the currency, right? So what happens if you print more and more currency and these kinds of things? So after witnessing the many financial crises, like the hyperinflation and things like that, the cyberpunks believe that the soundest economic system was a system which cannot be manipulated by the institutions, right? So that's the main idea behind that. So they want to have their own form of money, the cyberspace should be truly be free unless it has its own form of money and economy behind it, right? So that's the reason why people want to start with the digital currencies, some sort of the currency which is stateless, which can operate internationally and truly free from the control of the governments and the banks. So that is the main wish which they had. But on the other hand, as I was telling you before doing that, we need to solve some challenges. Especially, I was mentioning about the double spending problem, which is nothing but equivalent to counterfeit notes in case of physical fiat currencies, right? So let's look next what is double spending problem and how we try to solve it. Okay, let me stop here and then let's take 10 minutes break and then we can continue to the next session. Any questions before going on a break? Is there a comment or a question?
Yes, students, any clarifications required?
No questions? That means, am I very clear or am I completely unclear?
Can you tell your feedback, students, regarding this topic?
As it is, or is it utterly nonsense?
It's truly sense, Professor. Yes, anyone?
So clear, sir.
Okay, so
Yes, advice.
No, I was telling that it was clear.
Yeah, thank you.
okay, then let us meet in 10 minutes, right? I will again close the session so that I will record this one. See you in 10 minutes.